Okay. Good morning, everyone. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman. For those who don't know me, I am a professional organizer. Literally, what I do for a living is what I do 24/7. So I eat, breathe, live organizing. So I'm not shy when it comes to the conversation of a win number or doing field. I've worked on several campaigns. I lost count on how many campaigns I've worked on in total when you include volunteering, probably over 150. Um, Professionally, I've managed 6 campaigns. I've worked on field and also worked with a large team for Obama's campaign. I've done Senate races. I've done state Senate races, state rep races, and my title right now, I'm the SEIU Organizing Director for Local 2001. So basically, everything that we're having a conversation on today, I do it on Turbo Drive every single month for SEIU, which is a union. And again, that win number concept and trying to develop a field plan is very similar when you're doing labor organizing and taking a group of people who have never been union and asking them if they want to be guided to become union. And it's all the same information. So please do not be shy to stop me and ask questions. Um, I've been at this 15 years and I always love hearing the perspective of people who, just want to dive into it. Why is the win number so important? Well, literally, this is the bread and butter of your campaign. So if you're someone who is interested in running for office or interested in managing someone running for office, then you literally have no campaign if you don't know what your win number. What does that mean? Uh, Everything from how you're going to finance the start to the finish of the campaign going into Get Out the Vote GOTV week, from how you're going to allocate time, your volunteers, your potentially paid staff, how you're going to manage your database and use your call list. All this revolves around your win number. If you don't have a win number, then you will most likely mismanage your time, mismanage how you're going to allocate those funds to employees, people working on your campaign, and miss your target entirely and potentially lose. Upon occasion, I've seen situations where there was no win number and very rarely the person won. But when we have those victories that are luck, there was work involved, but no strategery. We don't want to say, well, it's not that hard, you know, let's ignore this next time. No. If by any chance you live in a community where there's candidates that maybe won through name recognition and didn't put as much effort into it, well, by not putting a win number, by not creating a strategic plan with your team or your DTC, you're creating an opportunity for misguidance. You're missing an opportunity for helping other candidates who might be bottom of the ticket. So let's try to do things right. Let's think about what it takes to actually win that seat and how we can get there. Okay. The goals for this session, we're gonna review how you make a plan, go through the basics of what it means to calculate a win number. So it's not so simple as 50% plus one and then you walk away, right? You have to go into detail and figure out how you're going to pull those numbers, where you're going to pull those numbers, what is the most accurate information. We're also going into the basics of what field is and why you need field. And I want to make sure that you leave this presentation today like you had at least a foundation, some beginning steps, so that way you can guide your volunteer team, guide whoever is working with you on the campaign. And, you can always refer back to us. The Newtown Democratic Party is here as a resource. We've been doing these trainings for a while now. And feel free to reach out to any of the presenters that you've seen throughout this month with the information that we're making sure that you have. We want to put that into practice, we want to make sure that you're knocking on doors. Why? We don't have the big bucks. We don't have $1 million to dump into a council campaign, right? No one does. That's not how it works. Most of you are looking at campaigns and are lucky to see if your Democratic Party for the whole slate has $10,000. So this is why we have to be strategic. Let's jump into how to make a plan. So when we're going into how to make a plan, right? And then for this segment, I will take myself off screen share very briefly here. You've probably already reviewed some of the basics, right? You've probably reviewed why you want to be a candidate or why you want to manage a candidate. You've probably had a conversation, or you've seen in previous trainings the first steps of making sure you have a treasurer, making sure that you have an organizing committee or a kitchen cabinet. These are people who believe in the cause, believe in you, believe in the candidate, and you're having global conversations of how did this campaign look, right? So when you're with that kitchen cabinet, when you're surrounded with your team, you already know that you have a base of people that you can pull from in order to get donations and get you started. That is the moment that you start planning out your win number, your field, making sure that you have enough volunteers to make the campaign still remain afloat, right? Make sure that it's flourishing. So drafting that plan, step one, literally, this is nothing too fancy here, right? Campaigns, I hate to say, at the end of the day, as much as we want to talk about changing the world, changing the narrative, it's a math game. So the actual campaign from day one to day 100 to day, however long you're in the race, is a calculation. And if you deviate from that calculation, you will lose. So with a pen and a paper or a laptop or a tablet, you're going to sit down and then pull records from your previous elections. In order to start you off on the right footing, you want to make sure you have as much information as possible. You're going to treat this as serious as when you treat research of your opponent, opposition research, right? So while you're pulling information about who am I running against, who am I as a candidate, what do I bring to the table? Well, I also want you to pull literally the history for the last 5 years of elections in your town for that seat and also for other similar seats. This gets a little difficult if maybe your town doesn't have up-to-date information. So you really have to depend on and lean on your Democratic Party. This is one of those moments where you're asking your registrar of voters. So ask your registrar of voters, do you have the previous election results? If not your registrar of voters, you can always go to the Secretary of State's office. One will always hope that they have up-to-date information. If they don't have that, again, circle back with your Democratic Party town chair, and they will help you navigate this process to make sure you have the necessary documents to cross-reference those numbers, right? Step two, please, please, please get on VAN. Voter Activation Network is an awesome resource. A lot of towns, unfortunately, opt out because they do not want to pay into Voter Activation Network, the VAN. And by doing that, you're missing an opportunity to cross-check those voters who voted and try to analyze, are they prime voters? Are they going to show up during this election like they showed up in the previous election? VAN allows you to have a more accurate idea of who you're targeting while you're creating that universe by pulling the win number. So universe are the people who you're going to ask to vote for you, the people who could potentially vote for you, right? So that is your universe. Win number is 50% plus one, the number you need to win an election, right? And then Voter Activation Network, VAN, is the software that the Democratic Party uses in order to input the conversations that you have with voters and also pull out algorithm of how people voted in their voting history, right? And again, slow me down if I'm going too fast. Going back to making a plan. So you had a conversation with the powers at be about where do I get this list? Where do I get this information? You also hopefully were able to acquire access to VAN. If not, there are other ways around that. Again, the Secretary of State's office, this is all public information, will let you pull information from their website and do a data dump of who is a registered voter and who voted. That is a much harder path to victory, because to manipulate that information when you've never done that before, and not in a way that's cohesive, VAN is a software that will help you guide that process. You will take a lot more time, and time is of the essence, right? Step 3, you have your list, you've acquired your list. You want to then start mapping it out. Hopefully you're putting it in some version of a spreadsheet, Google or Excel, whatever version you need to make sure it's easiest for you. And you start pulling those numbers and calculating what was turnout like for last year's municipal election. Please remember that when you're pulling that information, it is pertinent to the election you are running for or managing. So if you're running for, let's say, a council seat or a zoning seat, and these seats fall in a municipal year, and it doesn't align with a presidential year, or it doesn't align with a state rep year, depends on your town, then please take into consideration that you only want to pull those electoral years, those municipal years, so you can get a boilerplate of what turnout looks like for that election. Good example is Obama and Trump, right? We all know that there were anomalies in voter turnout because the elections themselves were so what's the right word? Hyped, right? Hyped people. There was a lot of money that was infused into each of those election years. Obama the first time, Obama the second time, Trump recently, right? Biden now. Money that usually doesn't appear for this election. If you see the voting history for the last 70 years, right? You know for a fact that in your town, you most likely had more voter turnout in those presidential years than in previous, right? So if you were to use that information to analyze it, compare it, and then try to pull an accurate number of who's going to show up to vote, then it's going to actually push you out of what your win number would be. Why? Because we've seen time and time again, it doesn't matter if you live in Coventry, in Fairfield, Connecticut, or in Southbury, that voters do not always turn out for municipal years. And that we've had conversations with political, behavioral psychologists and seeing the patterns. And they've investigated that for whatever reason, still till today, there are voters who only vote during presidential years and feel strongly that the only time it's important to vote are presidential years. So when you're organizing that information, do not contaminate your list with bad information, right? You don't want to pull from a presidential year if you're not running on a presidential year. You want to stay whole to the year that you're running for. So let's make sure we're keeping your list healthy and safe, and you're not misinforming yourself. When you're putting the accurate information from there, you're going to literally do a little bit of math, tally up those voters. You're going to create a medium, an average of who actually voted. So once you average that information all up, and you see on election year 2018, and then election year 2016, and then going back election year 2013. Well, in these years, I see that the pattern was 10,000, 11,000, 10,000. So you're going to have an average of who turned out. You're going to have an average of more or less how many people voted for that particular council seat or zoning seat. You don't want to pull the numbers for all of the town. You want to make sure that those numbers are based on just the seat that you have. And you literally add 1. It's 50% plus 1. Now, what I always like to do to be on the safe side, and they call this buffing the list, right, is taking a few other Democratic voters from that population, from that election year that you know exists, and then making sure we have enough votes to give us that 1 just in case. So occasionally you might have 50 people that you buff it with, 100 people. I always err on the safe side of 100, 150 for municipal elections. If we're talking about a state rep race, I usually buff it by 500. If we're talking about wider office, statewide office, then you're probably talking about a few thousand. So when I was running for a state representative, my win number was at that point 3,500, and I padded the list with probably 400 people, assuming that because it was an election year that was controversial, Trump was running already, Biden, Hillary, et cetera. There's so much going on. I assumed that by padding it by 400 people that I was going to be erring on the safe side, knowing that it was going to be an anomaly similar to the Obama year. I was sorely mistaken. So even I, right, a veteran of this, who I've been mentored by the best of them, some of the people who've taught me how to campaign manage and organize have been doing this 30 years and have won many campaigns, gubernatorial campaigns in our state. And I've cross-checked that information with some of these experts. And they also agreed that we had to buffer the list and pad the list with more people. And still, I was wrong by 1,000. That particular election coincided with a presidential year, coincided with Hillary Trump's election, and surprise, surprise, right? Trump won. Surprise that all the Republicans went out in full force, right? And then in addition to that, we had unaffiliated voters that came out of the woodwork who had never voted consistently in a presidential election. So when you're looking at that number, do not be shy with padding and giving a little bit of a push to make sure that you're erring on the safe side. Let me go back to the presentation and show you some examples here. Any questions?
Is there any way, so I know when I was volunteering for a campaign in 2018, the state central had made mention that, hey, 2018 is going to be super, super, super high turnout. So, take the midterms and then take a presidential year to try to make some sort of conglomeration, because it was just going to be so much higher than any previous midterm elections. So when it comes to those abnormal years, like you mentioned, 2020 or 2016 or 2018, where it's going to be stupidly higher than anything in the past. First off, is it more of a guessing game of when you make that decision that it's going to be super high? And then is there any reasonable way to predict how high an abnormally high turnout election will be?
Technically, nothing's a guessing game. Technically, because when you're calculating these numbers, and I'll use Nick. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Nick Kapoor. The 112th seat is open right now, and he has a special election. So when we were calculating his win number, John Murphy and I and Andrew and the whole team, we went as back as well. Nick is fabulous with keeping and maintaining his town's numbers and having that information on hand. So Nick had literally 40 years of voter information for his town, for his district. So going back to the math game, a lot of you on this call, I'm assuming, are doing municipal elections and probably not dabbling too much with larger elections. If that's the case, then you don't have to do the 40-year pull of information. You're totally fine pulling 3 years and then seeing where the win number takes you despite any anomalies, right? Because they're midterms, you shouldn't expect an influx of voters who just turned out willy-nilly, right? But if you are someone who's running for state rep, or you're planning to run for any other office, higher office, right? Or you just have a harder seat, maybe for mayor or select person, and you happen to have access to a larger um, uh, portfolio of numbers, right? So if you have 40 years election results, then you put them into an Excel spreadsheet, you do a data dump, and that averaging, you can average out voter turnouts and create statistics based on voter persuasion from those 40 years of information. So like when Nick told me that his win number was in the 2000s, I'm like, that is really low. Like your people go and vote consistently. And I immediately went to pull information from the last 4 years. And in the Monroe region, they were looking at an average that was 5% higher in voter turnout than Newtown. Granted, both towns have great voter turnout. You know, you have towns in Connecticut that if they're lucky to get past 20%, 30%, it's like hallelujah, right? Like Hartford. But when you're talking about smaller towns in Fairfield County, we're averaging 89%, 92%. So two problems happen when you're that close to 100%. What problem number one, you don't really have anomalies, right? So there is no guessing game. There is no, padding the list that you're creating. Number two, when your voter turnout's that high, if you have a predominantly, like the most of Connecticut, unaffiliated town, and the second majority to that is Republican, where are you going to find those voters, right? You're already starting off your race knowing that you're going to lose. So going back really quickly, and I'll come back to the anomalies, but just backtracking very quickly. When you're planning and you're having conversation of why you want to run, and you're doing some soul searching of all that sacrifice and time that you're going to put into this campaign, or why you want to manage a campaign, there's different reasons to want to run, right? And hopefully the candidate, if you are the candidate that you're managing, truly believes that they have the capacity to win. Because if you don't have the ambition to win, then why are you there? But if the numbers don't show you a path to victory, then I would highly suggest, like, this is literally the first thing that you should be doing before you even file for an election and you're trying to map out, am I going to run for office, or am I going to help my friend Susie run for office? Well, you know what? You got to figure out, is this a winnable seat? Is this worthwhile? Because if it's not, you're dumping a lot of money and wasting a lot of time for no reason. And it doesn't mean that the end result won't help you grow the Democratic vote in your town. Like, there's no such thing as a bad election at the end of the day. If you're putting time and energy out there to register voters, that's a wonderful thing. But let's be strategic about how you use that time. Some of these volunteers that are your friends, if you have them, all gun ho for this election, and in your calculation of your win number, there was no path to victory, then you're literally putting them in a scenario where they're burning out, and they might have a very sour end result and not come back. They might give you your all this time and then walk away, and they disappear into the ether as if they never volunteered for the Democratic Party or candidate before. And you don't want that. You want to come out with an experience where people feel like there is an opportunity to win, even if you lost, that you did the best job possible. So you need the best tools possible. So back to the anomaly. When you're looking at presidential years, right, and you're pulling that information, and I'll use myself again as an example. Newtown, for that specific presidential year, we were averaging pretty good voter turnout, always above 80, right? At a certain point in the 20 years of just looking and analyzing information, we even hit like top 10 town with voter turnout in the state. But even at top 10, we weren't at 100% voter turnout from the electorate who was allowed to vote or could vote, right? There's always a high school student who didn't, sign up and they're not registered, et cetera. So I knew coming in we had high voter turnout, but there was wiggle room, and a lot of things have changed in this last decade for the Democratic Party, for most of our towns that are on this call today. We went from being the party of, rural, occasionally winning some campaigns. And yes, the Democratic Party has some degree of stronghold. This is 10 years ago. Like, yeah, we're winning, but there was Roland and there was Jody Rell, and in your municipality, most likely the select person was Republican. To now, 10 years later, we have a trifecta. We have consistently won many campaigns. We are seeing an uptick in growth since Trump winning. He has pushed our democratic voters to a place of activism. I'm sure you all saw coming out of the woodwork, and maybe you're a person yourself who came out of the woodwork and said, I have to do something about this. I can't stay home. I have to go to a meeting. So consistently for the last 10 years, you've seen voters activate, voters participate, but that does not mean that all of a sudden you're going to go from having 50% Republican to then, uh, switching it over to 70% Democrat. That's not how it works, unless you have thousands and thousands of people leaving your town and then people moving in are Democrats. It's not going to create those kind of anomalies that you see in the presidential election. My anomaly, going back to there is no such thing as anomaly, is the mistake that I did not understand and I did not analyze correctly with my peers, the capacity for the Republican vote to go out and run and win in Newtown. We took that for granted. We assumed that those unaffiliated voters were truly unaffiliated. They were not. They were Republican. We also assumed that they were going to stay home. And when we pulled that list, we pulled it with only 3 years. So if you want to mitigate the anomaly, and if you have the access to information going up to 40 years, you can start analyzing behavior. You can start looking into, oh, these unaffiliated voters for the last 20 years, they have consistently been voting Republican. How do we have access to that? You're saying, the vote is secret? Well, is it truly secret? We have algorithms. There are millions of dollars pumped in every single day from different companies who acquire a lot of information about everyone who's on this call and everyone who goes and votes. So when referring back to your advantage of using the tools in your toolbox, like Voter Activation Network, well, if I had the ability to do it all over again, I would have gone further back. I would have pulled on Van, who are the prime voters for the Democratic Party, who are the prime voters for the Republican Party, what do these behaviors look like when it comes to unaffiliated voters, and I would have had a better and more consistent win number and not been surprised with numbers that deviated by 1,000, right? So these are rare examples. These anomalies are rare examples. Again, if you're running for zoning, if you're running for school board, if you're running for municipal election, it's pretty cut and dry. You pull from the 3, you average out voter turnout, you look at how many people it took to win that seat before, who's the highest vote getter, 50% plus 1, you can pad the list, buff it a little, and then you should be okay. That was extremely long-winded, but did that help?
No, I appreciated it.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else did, but I appreciated it.
Fair enough. So these are examples directly from the CT Dems. They were pulling examples from just random votes here. And I think this one's probably, when was this presentation? This slide, I think presentation was made 2 elections ago. So they were just doing like the averages of who can actually go and vote, like where party support lies. And if you were in Van, it wouldn't look like this. The breakdown would, if we have time and you're okay with it, I can actually show you in live time how it looks. The breakdown is not it's a vertical breakdown, it's not horizontal, and then they promote those prime numbers. So what we're looking at is a combination of the voter turnout, so Democratic base, who are your Dems, right? Who are your Republicans? Who are people that we, going back to that algorithm and information being public knowledge, right? Who are people who are motivate, or we can make them persuade them to be Democrats, or tend to be persuaded Democrats. Like some of the questions that show up on Van that allow us to understand this person is more Dem than Republican is, ooh, do they support teachers? You know, teachers, when it comes to public school teachers, this is a Democratic value. Or do they support abortion? You know, if they're registered as a Republican, but in the past, in the information that we've captured, they've consistently supported abortion and, you know, pro-choice values, then maybe this is someone that we can add them into our list to pad the list, or add them into our target universe to make sure that we're persuading them to vote Democrat for this candidate. Maybe it's a specific topic, a specific issue that you can align. Let's say your candidate is big on the environment, knows a lot about the environment. And when you look at those prime voters who are for the environment, you can pull them out of the list and make sure that they're in your universe of conversation, so that you're not leaving them and to waste away by themselves without having some sort of conversation, despite them being Republican or despite them being unaffiliated. Why do we have to do this? Again, a lot of our towns in the state of Connecticut, especially the smaller ones, are not a majority Democrat. We are consistently winning. You know, time has been on our side, but when the majority of your town is registered unaffiliated, you have to figure out who are the people that will align with my candidate. Who should I talk to? How can I make the time work for my candidate so we can win? So you want to look at these prime voters and these averages. So it's a reflection of what are the chances that this person's going to vote for me versus not vote for me. Okay. Going into who are we, right? And I was just talking about that. So we have an example of, I put here Bob. Bob works a 9 to 5. You know, he has a family. He's a husband. He has 3 kids. His voting record is perfect. Awesome. We like you, Bob, right? Arnold, right here, also 9 to 5. That's great. You know, why does it matter that he has the 9 to 5 and that we know that information? Well, in the world of non-COVID, right? Typically, we expect someone who has a normal 9 to 5 schedule, has accessibility to go and vote, accessibility to the polls, and doesn't have difficult hurdles pushing them out from not being able to vote, right? His voting record's perfect, awesome, right? And then we have here Christine. Christine is only a presidential voter. She says, I don't need to go vote in municipal midterms. Like, who's my select person? There's a select person in my town. Oh yeah, that person who sends me, you know, a welcome email like once every 2 years. I'm not really involved. It doesn't really matter. The president's the only thing that matters, right? So we don't like Christine. We have to persuade Christine. Or Juana, she has registered, literally a newbie. Welcome, Juana. That's great. We're going to have a conversation with Juana, but the likelihood of Juana voting for us versus voting, you know, expecting Bob to vote or Arnold to vote is much less for Juana and Christine than it is for Bob and Arnold. So we have to be smart about, again, those numbers that we're adding to our list. So if we go back here, and we're going back to the averages of the people going to vote and interested in voting for us, and we compare it with the real life person, right? The Bobs of the world or the Juanas of the world. We're making an analysis and we're saying, well, Bob is here. Bob's 90 plus, like Bob doesn't skip a beat. But, you know, Juan is non-existent. And then Christine is somewhere here. You know, Christine shows up, but she shows up only in presidential. It's going to be really hard to try to motivate her to go and show up for us when we need her. So we have to be completely aware of who these individuals are and what they represent for our voter turnout. It doesn't mean that you're going to X them out from your equation. So when you're pulling from your list, especially if it's really a tight race with trying to turn out Dems and your Dem list is low, then you're going to add in Juana, you're going to add in Christine, you're going to even go a step further and say, wow, I'm missing 500 voters from my list, from my universe to make this work. I have to go and register, 500 students or 500 newly moved in residents to make sure that I have the numbers to try to win. So you still want Christine and Juana, you just know you can't depend on them because they're not a steady vote. With that said, Juana, the person who registered last week, if you are the candidate or if you're part of the campaign of volunteer, it is more likely, and this is again behavioral psychologists investigating how politics works in the person's mind. There are studies that show that someone who is asked to vote and register, and you are registering them for a current election, and you had that conversation with them, they are more likely to vote for your candidate, even if you didn't have the full inoculation, as long as you called the question, right? And you said, can you vote for Tom Johnson? He's running for selectman. After you registered them, they are more likely to vote for Tom than vote for the opponent because you had that conversation. So you should use whoever you registered to vote as a gold mine and as a great way to make sure that you're padding your list, you're buffing up that list, as opposed to Christine, who has already set her ways into her habits and most likely has no intention of showing up for your race. And you'd have to really persuade her and convince her that this election matters for Tom Johnson, right? Going back as a review of the 50+1, right? So you have your X meets Y meets 1 equals your end number. We briefly reviewed how you can buff your list, how you can research and get a little bit more clarity as to who your electorate is and where to get that information. So, go to the Secretary of State's office, Ballotpedia, by the way, is also a good resource just to get basic numbers so you have an idea. If you are brand new to this and you've never gone into the Secretary of State's website, you've never navigated it, and you just want to know, is this the right move for me before you dive into all of the details, then check out Ballotpedia, see if they have the candidate information from the previous election, and then you can use that as a boilerplate as to, am I ready to run, right? Am I ready to try to meet that number? If you're gonna do the deeper dive, get the real information, then definitely talk to the registrar, definitely talk to someone at the Secretary of State's office or pull that information. They are great about giving tutorials of how to navigate their website and make sure that we have resources. And of course, the Democratic Party, either your town or the state, there's many qualified people around you to make sure that you have as much success as possible to win an election. So tap into those resources. They're not going to appear out of thin air. You have to make the ask. You have to be there and ready to say, I need help. So if you anticipate turnout to be 50%, then you take that into the calculation. You have that average. You take out the calculation of averages, and I'll take my mouse off if you want to screenshot this. And you make sure that you analyze that turnout versus that 50% +1. And voila, that is your win number. So it's a simple calculation. Again, if you're doing a midterm local seat, don't worry too much about anomalies. If you're running for state rep or other seats, then definitely take that into consideration. Maybe go a little further with what you're pulling. It's still the same concept, just so you're not taken off guard. Any questions? Nope, okay. So going back to how you plan to reach your win numbers, I briefly said, talk to the voters, right? And I think I said, that it's really important to register the voters. And I use the Juana example, right? So none of this matters if you don't have a field plan. So let's say you got your win number, you know you're going to run, you did all that research, you have your kitchen cabinet, you already registered as a candidate or are planning to register very soon. You have a treasurer, right? The treasurer is like the first thing you need to file. Without that person, you can't file to run for office. And now you're at that position where they're like, how am I going to use this information? Like, why does it matter? I know I need to talk to people, but talking to people is just talking to people. Like, why do I have to be more strategic? I just door knock. Wrong. Why do you have to be strategic? And then maybe I can get some comments here. So tell me what the one resource is that you can't get back. What's the number one resource that's super important in election? And you can put it in the chat if you don't want to get off camera or get on audio. Oh, Robert got it right in the first try. Okay. Robert, how long have you been doing this? Have you managed campaigns before? Robert.
So, sort of. I've since like high school, so like for like 5-ish years, depending on what counts as volunteering, what counts as working.
Fair enough. Most people, when I ask that question, say money. And I'm like, nope, it's definitely not money. It's time. You're absolutely right, Robert. So you made those 5 years count and you've been paying attention. Time is the one thing that you're never going to get back. Time is the one thing that as a candidate, one would wish that you had more of. If I just had 2 more weeks, I would have won. If I just had like 2 more voters, well, those 2 more voters equate into time, you know, because you can't be everywhere at every given moment. So you have to make use of your time because you're never going to get it back. If you, and then not to mention, there are, you know, voting, there are how to run laws, right? So if you say you're going to run and you wait 2 months, that's illegal. That's how it works. Like if you know you're going to run and you're a candidate and behind the scenes, you're doing all of this work and you've told your friends you're running, there is a countdown as to when you have to announce to run for state rep, to run for council. You can't just leave yourself hanging and think that for 6 months, I'm going to keep planning, researching, maybe raising some money and not tell formally the world, Secretary of State's or your town that you're official candidate. So make sure that you look into those dates of filing with your town and with the Secretary of State's office. Make sure that you're doing everything above board. You never want a situation, and I will use Bridgeport as an example. Bridgeport has a tendency in the past of our Democratic candidates, unfortunately, to not file paperwork, to literally forget to file paperwork. And it's embarrassing and it's sad because there's so many missed opportunities when you're not on top of your filing and your documents, right? So please be on top of that. Make sure that you know all the rules. Make sure that you have that conversation with your organizing committee. So going back to time, when you've done those filings, when you've analyzed who is in your universe, you have to understand that now time is of the essence, and you're working backwards to get to that number, right? So when you create a campaign calendar, you don't start day one. I'm a candidate. Today is February 2nd, and the election's November 8th, and the expectation is day one, I talked to my town chair. Day two, I talked to my organizing committee. Day three, I talked to, I filed. Woohoo, I talked to 20 voters. No, that's not how it works. Because time is of the essence and you want to make sure that your money is being used wisely, that you have enough for, 5 mailers, 3 mailers, you're going to start the calendar from election day and work your way to today. Why? You most likely will run out of money. Most likely. It happened. So to avoid a situation where you put in $100, $200, $1,000, $4,000 into an election and you have, mailer number one, mailer number two, and then come GOTV, the last 2 weeks of the election, you have $0. You have to work starting from the election day back, because I've seen, and these are not my words. Like, you can go into Wellstone Way, you can go into PCCC. I don't care what webinar you do. I'm sure experts will tell you the same thing. You never, ever, ever want to get into a scenario where you're calculating, assuming certain information happening now, but not preparing for the future, because a campaign does not happen in a month. Very rarely are we in a situation that you have a special election. Even then, you still want to work from the calendar day of the election and working back. When you have at least enough savings and you're working, you're planning around the election day, making sure that you have money for food for your volunteers. Yes, that should be in your plan, by the way. Like, if you think it is appropriate to not leave $100 to $200 of basic money, just something so simple like donuts, then that is wrong. Like, we are not Republicans here. We are Democrats. We care for our own. Republicans can throw out, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, wasting them on billboards, wasting them on signs and marketing, and then forget about how to treat their workers and their volunteers right. Those are not our values. We are the party of caring for each other. So something so simple like donuts matters in a campaign. Some of the volunteers that are working for you are putting in 10 hours a week, 5 hours a week for free. So again, leave that money available for that time. You also want to leave money available for your last get out the vote mailer, right? If you don't have enough money raised to do, usually in a campaign, you want to do 7 to 9 touches. Again, there's been studies showing, behavioral psychologists, that saying in order to convince someone to vote for you, to vote for that candidate, you have to talk to them or interact with them at least 7 to 9 times. So those are called touches. And then from those touches, you will ask them, you call the question, you will ask them, will you go and vote for the Democratic candidate? Will you go and vote for Tom Johnson or Susie Smith? That is calling the question. And in that ask, whatever they say is your ID, your identification, right? Like, they say, no, I will not vote for Tom. No, I will not vote for Susie. Or they say, yes, enthusiastically vote for Susie. And enthusiastic, then you ask them if they want to be a volunteer. Yes, I will vote for Tom. Great, you're keeping that information. So as you're working your way through that calendar and getting closer to election day, the hope is, when you're doing a field, how do you reach your win number? How do you make sure all of this hard work has values? You try to door knock that universe that we mapped out in the beginning of the session, and you or call them, whatever version of IDing them is necessary. And when you have conversations with Susie, when you have conversations with Tom's neighbors, with all of these people who are potentially going to say, yes, I'm going to vote for this candidate, then you're starting to accrue all of the IDs that you need to win, and slowly getting closer to that win number that you calculated. So that by GOTV, get out the vote, that those 2 weeks prior to election day, that, wow, I put in all this hard work in the last 5 months. And I know for a fact, I only needed 500 voters to win. That's what history has told me. And I have 1,000 voters who told me that, yes, they're going to vote for my candidate. So you would love to be in that situation come GOTV, because if you are, that means the mailer that you kept money, set aside for, is going to go out only to people who said to your volunteers or to your candidate that, yes, indeed, they're going to vote for your candidate. And that mailer is just solidifying your victory, right? You're coming into election day, doing last minute phone calls, making sure that you turn them out, that they actually go and vote at the polls, or now maybe absentee ballot. And you're sitting on a very pleasant situation that you did everything right. If you don't ID people, if you don't have a field plan, if you're not door knocking or phone banking, then you're coming into election blind. You're coming into the election possibly with some money and not knowing where to put it because it's too late to send a mailer. You're coming into the election not knowing who to call to remind them that's election day. So imagine a scenario where you didn't door knock anyone, you didn't really ID anyone, or maybe you door knocked, but you didn't write it down, your volunteers didn't write it down. It's election day. Who are you going to call to remind them to vote for you? Are you going to cold call a random list of people? No. Why? Because you can be turning out, even if on paper they are registered Democrats and we're assuming that they tend to vote for us, because they're registered Democrats. We don't know what happened in their life. We don't know what struck a chord with a news outlet with that potential Democrat turned Republican. And you're going to call a random person who we've never talked to before on election day and say, go and vote for Tom or Susie. And you might be turning out someone who's going to vote against them. Or maybe it's, we're talking about municipal politics most of the time and midterm politics. There could be some issue or something personal that voter does not connect to the potential candidate. It could be something so simple as maybe this person's running for the second time, this candidate's running for the second time, and the first time they ran, they voted on council against the bag bill, the plastic bag ban. And that voter wasn't too happy about that. So you're going to call that voter and remind them to vote for your candidate and remind them to go vote in general. Well, they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go vote, but I'm not going to vote for you. So these are things that you want to avoid. You want to take that 50% plus one. You want to create add to your plan, be strategic about how you spend your time, how you have those conversations. And then that way, when you're identifying voters, when you've ID'd them, when you know clearly when they say, yes, I will vote for you, then you're creating a path to victory that you're feeling certain that you're going to win. Any questions there? No, not a very lively group. Okay.
All right. Well, Ava, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thanks everybody for signing on and signing up. And we definitely hope that you can make the most of all these different sessions. And we've got our deep dive into social media coming up with Andrew Gauss poll from 475 Consulting at 11 o'clock. Joan from our DTC will be moderating that with Andrew. So with that, have a lovely day, folks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.